My name is Evelyn, and I was married to a man named Thomas for 13 years. We met when I was fresh out of university, idealistic, hungry for the world. He was older, confident, successful. Back then, that felt like love. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was just someone older knowing how to give just enough attention to make you feel special. We got married quickly. He had a solid job in finance, was just starting in publishing. Our wedding was modest: family, friends, laughter, hope. Everyone believed in the life we were building. For a while, I did too. We settled into routine. Weekdays were work, weekends were chores and quiet dinners. We didn't argue much, not because we were perfect, but because I learned early not to provoke him. When Thomas was upset, he didn't yell, he shut down. Days of silence. Cold shoulders. I found myself apologizing for things I didn't do, to feel warm again. Still, I stayed. I told myself he was tired, stressed, that if I just loved harder, gave more, everything would soften again. It didn't. I remember the exact moment things cracked. It was our 10th anniversary. I went out to dinner, nice restaurant, candles, wine, and he spent more time on his phone than looking at me. When the check came, I hadn't even finished my glass before he stood up and said, "You ready?" Like we'd just wrapped a meeting, not a decade of marriage. That night, lying beside him in bed, stared at the ceiling and realized I felt lonelier with him than I ever did alone. Then came Lucas. He wasn't someone I was looking for. He worked in the same office building as mine, and we bumped into each other one rainy morning at the cafe downstairs. He held the door open and smiled, an ordinary gesture that somehow felt extraordinary. We began talking about nothing at first. Weather, coffee, busy mornings. Then, one day, after Thomas had made another quiet dig about my cooking, Lucas asked, "Are you okay?" Surprised myself by answering honestly. That opened something. We started chatting more, lingering near the cafe, riding the elevator together, joking over email. I told myself it was harmless. It's just a friendship. But at WASN single quotes, not really. I didn't feel guilty at first. Felt seen. Like I had stepped out of fog and into sunlight. At home, Thomas barely noticed. Or maybe he just didn't care. He was wrapped in his work, his workouts, his motivational podcasts. When I shared something, he'd mutter "Mom" without looking up from his screen. When I wore a new dress, he didn't glance up. Then one night, Lucas texted, "Hope your day wasn't too hard. You've got a quiet strength I really admire." I cried. Not because it was romantic, but because it was kind. And I hadn't realized how starved I was for kindness. I still hadn't crossed a line, not physically. But my heart had already started walking away. And the more I told myself I was in control, the less I actually was. Then came the night of the party. Thomas bailed last minute. Said he had to work late. I went alone but spent the whole evening checking my phone, hoping for a message from Lucas. It came, "That you look amazing tonight." I smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't felt in months. Later that week, I ran into Lucas at a bookstore. A coincidence, maybe? Or fate? He joked. I laughed. But I stayed. We sat and talked for 2 hours, surrounded by fiction, but living something real. Back home, Thomas was asleep on the couch. The TV buzzed. A half-eaten pizza box sat on the coffee table. I looked at him and felt nothing. No hate, no love. Just a void. We never touched, not once. Not even a hug. But emotionally, I was gone. And I think I knew it couldn't last that way forever. Then everything shattered. It was a Wednesday. I came home early. The apartment was quiet, but Thomas's briefcase was on the counter. Odd. I walked into our bedroom. His laptop was open, logged into a private messaging app. I didn't mean to snoop. Truly, I didn't. But something in my gut urged me to look. And there it was, message after message. Late night confessions, flirtatious jokes, emotional intimacy, not with a stranger, with Emily, my best friend from college, dozens of conversations. Complaints about his marriage, jokes about sneaking away, Talk of what could have been. And in that moment, everything inside me went still. The betrayal wasn't just about sex. It was about trust, about who I had become in a life that kept shrinking around me while I kept giving and giving until there was nothing left. I stared at that screen, realizing I hadn't been imagining things. I wasn't the only one drifting, but I had been the only one honest about it. That connection, I sat down on the beaten, stared at the screen numb all this time I had been trying to forgive myself or feeling something for someone else end here. Thomas was already deep in Tohei's own betrayal with someone I had honestly trusted like a sister when he came home later that evening. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't even confront him right. Away, I just said dinner's on the stove, and watched him eat, unaware thoughts woman across from him had. Finally stopped making gaxkisses that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling again, but this time, I wasn't wondering what went wrong. I was planning what came next, and this time I wouldn't be the one who stayed silent. Used to think revenge meant fire screaming, smashing things, storming outdoor in a rage, but real revenge that leaves an echo is cold, precise, measured. After I read the messages between Thomas and Emily, I didn't confront them, not immediately. I didn't let them see the storm coming. I wanted them to feel safe, secure. That's how betrayal thrives. It needs the illusion of safety, so I gave them exactly that. For the next few days, I played the role of the unsuspecting wife. I cooked his favorite meals, laughed at his dull jokes of N, kissed him goodnight, and all through Heil. I was watching, listening, planning. First person I talked to about it wasn't Lucas, it was myself. I spent 2 days alone that weekend. No calls, no messages. Just me, a notebook, and the truth. I wrote everything down, not just what I'd found, but how I'd felt over the years, the loneliness, the gaslighting, the constant emotional starvation. I realized something important during that silence. I'd been shrinking for years, so before I could take any action I needed to rebuild myself. Not for Thomas, not for revenge, but because I needed to remember who I was before I became the wife. These Khan thought the background character in someone else's story. The next step. Ooze. Gathering more proof, not because I'd planned to confront him in a dramatic shown, but because I knew Thomas Hugh was the kind of man who did everything unless you cornered him with facts. So I started taking screenshots, transcripts, even photos of him leaving the house late at night under the pretense of work when he was actually meetingly. I didn't follow him. I didn't need to. Her post gave away more than she realized. The reflection in her wine glass. A hotel hallway, the timestamps, all teeny clues, but enough to piece together a pattern. And during this, I quietly distanced myself emotionally. I love you, he threw casually my way. Was met with a soft smile and a nod. I was not agree. I was done. Lucas noticed the change in me. One afternoon over coffee, asked you seemed different lately, stronger, lighter. I didn't tell him everything, just enough that I had discovered something about my husband, was dealing with it in my own way. He didn't push for details. That's what I liked about Lucas, who listened more than he spoke. As the weeks passed, I began subtly shifting things in our shared life. I opened my own bank account, quietly rerouted a portion of my paycheck there. I went through our documents, made copies, stored them with my sister, just in case. I backed up every file, every piece of proof, every shred of evidence. I was laying bricks, quietly building my wall then. I reached out to Emily Shosbond. His name was Jason. We had met in Lee a few times, always at gatherings where he looked more like Emma Sassery than her partner. He was a bit reserved, but he had always been kind. I didn't call him. I wrote a letter, a simple, polite, factual letter, no emotion, just evidence, screenshots, dates, times, and a final line that said, I thought you deserved to know. I didn't sign it. I don't know what happened at between them after that. But Emma stopped posting for a while, and when Cher surfaced, her tone had changed. Lesmig, more restrained. That was the first triple at home. Thomas remained oblivious, so caught up in his lies. He didn't see the ground shifting beneath him. I stopped. Asking where he was going, stopped caring when he came home. Lateef seemed to relax him. He thought I had either stopped suspecting or stopped caring. Both were true in a way, but the final act needed more. I didn't want To just to walk away. I wanted him to feel what Ty had felt blindsided. Small replace a blazo. I planned our anniversary dinner. Made reservations at the same restaurant where we'd gone on our first date. Told him I wanted to reconnect, that we had drifted, but I was willing to try. He was surprised, maybe even suspicious, but he agreed. Maybe he thought it would ease his guilt, or maybe he was arrogant enough to think he deserved both me and Emily. That night, I wore a dress he once said made me look too loud. I wore it on purpose. I let him open the door for me, let him pull out my chair, let him order wine, pretending just for a little while that we were still as then. I gave him the gift, a small black envelope. He opened it, smiling like expected a handwritten note or a trip brochure instead. He pulled out photo printouts of messages, locations, a timeline. I had labeled everything like a project manager, because that's what this was, a project closure. His face went pale. Didn't raise my voice, didn't cry, it just said, I know I've known for a while this dinner isn't for reconciliations, for farewell. He stammered, asked questions I ignored. I stood up, calmly placed my napkin on the table, and said, I'll be moving out next week. The apartment is under both our names. Beautium, not staying where I was, lied to every night. Walked out, left him sitting. They're still holding the photos, looking like a man who just realized he wasn't as clever as he thought in the weeks that followed. I kept my word. I moved out, took what was mine, changed my phone number, blocked him on everything, tried to contact me. Of course, long messages about how it didn't mean anything, how he still loved me, how I could work through it. I never responded. Had made his choices, now he could live with them. Lucas and I continued, Totzuk slowly, gently. I didn't rush into anything. I needed time to be Meiselfogain before I could be any on so anything. But I appreciated his prosenso's friendship, his quiet understanding. One day I was walking past old cafe where Lucas and I used Tommy, and I saw Thomas sitting alone by his window. He looked older, tired, his phone on the table, untouched. I watched him for a moment, not out of longing but curiosity. He had always been so certain world would bend to him, that people were too weak to walk away. But I had walked and I hadn't looked back. That was my revenge. Not scandal, not drama, but silence, peace. Alif lived well without him. It's funny, people think the greatest victory is proving someone wrong, but sometimes the greatest victory is simply no longer needing to life after a stormies. Strange liquid. When I left Thomas, I didn't know what the world would look like without them. For 13 years, he had been the center of my decisions. My time, my compromise one. That presence disappeared. It felt like my life had lost gravity. A while untethered, weightless, unsure whether I was free or simply drifting, but slowly things began to fall into place. My new apartment. It wasn't glamorous, small 2-bedroom on the 4th floor with creaky wooden floors and a leaky faucet. But it was mine. Every pillow, mug, every light switch belonged to a space where I wasn't lied to. Thatman Samething the first few weeks were lonely, not in the painful way it had been with Thomas, more in the way of learning how to be alone again, how to enjoy my own company. I'd forgotten what teeth felt like to come home and not brazen myself for tension. I'd forgotten what silence sounded like when it wasn't full of dread. I started doing small things for myself, things I hadn't done in years. I painted again, not for anyone else, just for me. Abstract shapes, messy colors. I cooked what I liked, even if it wasn't what Thomas used to prefer. I wore pajamas until noon on weekends. I read books until my eyes ached. It was like meeting a version of myself I had not seen in over a decade. She was quieter, stronger, and less afraid than I remembered. Lucas remained in my life. Patiently, respectfully, he never pushed for more. He understood when I needed space. We met for coffee, sometimes walked in the park, sat on a bench without saying much. There was something healing in his presence and knowing that someone could care for me without needing to control me. Eventually, I opened up. I told him everything, not all at once, just layers. one at a time, like peeling an onion. He listened without flinching, no judgment, just understanding. He once said to me, "It's not about how much pain someone caused you. It's about what you do with that pain. That's what defines you." That stuck with me, so I made a decision. I wasn't going to let my story end in bitterness. I had been betrayed. He's hurt deeply, but I refused to let thought betrayal be the most important thing about me. I started therapy, not Buck. I was broken, but because E wanted to make sure I didn't carry invisible wounds into the future, my therapist helped me untangle years off patterns the way I'd learned to minimize me needs, the way I'd accepted emotional neglect as normal. We talked about boundaries, about self-worth, about the quiet ways women are taught to disappear in their own marriages, and somewhere along the way I began to forgive not Thomas, not yet maybe, not ever, but myself. Staying too long for believing too much, for trying to fix what wasn't mine to fix. One afternoon, nearly 6 months after I left, I received a letter in the mail, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting, Thomas. I debated whether Tourette's part of me wanted to rip it up, but I didn't. I opened it and read I tense quietly. It wasn't an apology, not Ariel one. It was more like an explanation. He said he had made mistakes, that he had felt disconnected, that Emily understood him in a way he thought I didn't, but then he wrote something that almost made me laugh. "You were always too strong." It made me feel small there. It was the truth. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It was that I was too much for someone who didn't want to grow alongside me. He hadn't left me for Someone better. He'd clung to Someone sewer, someone who didn't challenge his ego, someone who didn't force him to confront himself. I folded the letter and put it away, not out of sentimentality, because I wanted to remember what happens when you let someone else define a lot by you. A few weeks later, I ran into Emily. It was at the grocery store of all places. I was picking out tomatoes when I heard her voice behind me. I turned Anthea. She was thinner, more tense. Wearing sunglasses indoors, she tried to pretend she didn't see me, but I stood my ground. "Emily," I said quietly. She Ethan turned toward me. "Evelyn, hi." There was a long silence. She looked like she was searching for a script. But I didn't give her one. I just waited. Finally, she said, "I didn't mean for it to happen. That was it. Not sorry, not I hurt you, just a weak excuse wrapped in guilt." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I picked up my tomatoes, gave her a small, unbothered smile, and walked away. That was that closure, not a confrontation, just proof that I had moved past her, past him, past a love at Lucas, and a toe. I continued growing closer. One evening while we were walking near the river, he took my hand for the first time. It was gentle, no fireworks, no grand declarations, just a soft, steady warmth. The kind of touch that says, "I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." But it wasn't rushing into anything I had learned. The value of my peace, love, if it came again, would need to earn its way in slowly, honestly. 1 year after leaving Thomas E. stood in my new apartment, staring out the window at the city skyline. I thought about the version of myself who had once sat in silence at a dinner table, desperate for attention. Thought about the woman who had doubted herself for years, who had lost her voice, who had been told she was too much, and I felt proud I didn't burn bridges. I didn't scream, I didn't play dirty. I chose silence, strategy, grace. I chose myself. Thomas didn't just lose a wife, he lost someone who would have stood beside him through anything. Okay? I felt he had stood beside me, but I didn't lose. I found myself. That was my revenge, and not another affair. Not public humiliation, just the simple, powerful act of rebuilding myself in full view of the person who tried to break me. Now, when people ask if I'm angry, I say no, I'm not angry, I'm free. And sometimes freedom is the best revenge of all. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Thanks for listening. BYEEEE.